Every empire has a secret. Rome had its legions. Britain had its navy. America had the petrodollar, a system so powerful it could buy the world. But power built on illusion always comes with a price. Stay till the end, because what's collapsing now will decide who controls money and who gets crushed by it. In 1971, President Richard Nixon cut the dollar's last tie to gold. In 1974, Washington sealed a secret pact with Saudi Arabia, one that bound every barrel of oil to American currency. For 50 years, that deal made the dollar the bloodline of global trade. But today, that blood is leaking out. Dollar reserves have fallen from 71% in 1999 to just 58%. Nations are walking away, one by one. The system that defined modern power is breaking in plain sight. What most people don't realize is that this collapse didn't begin yesterday. It was built into the system from the very start. The petrodollar wasn't born from free markets. It was engineered a mechanism of control disguised as global stability. For decades, it let Washington print wealth while others produced it. Every war, every imported luxury, every trillion-dollar bailout depended on one thing: the world's belief that the dollar would never fall. But faith isn't infinite. When confidence erodes, empires fall faster than anyone expects. The British pound learned that lesson a century ago. The dollar is learning it now. You can already see the warning lights: oil trades in yuan, gold purchases at record highs, and central banks diversifying in silence. The unraveling has begun. To understand today's collapse, we have to return to the ashes of war. In 1944, at a quiet resort in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, 44 nations gathered to rebuild the world's shattered economy. The United States sat at the head of the table. It held 2/3 of the planet's gold and half of its industrial power. Out of that summit emerged a simple promise: every currency would be tied to the dollar, and the dollar would be backed by gold at $35 an ounce. For nearly 3 decades, the system worked. Dollars became the language of trade, gold anchored trust. Factories roared from Detroit to Pittsburgh, and nations shipped their wealth to America in exchange for paper that could be turned into metal. But empires rarely resist the temptation to overspend. The Cold War, Korea, Vietnam, and Lyndon Johnson's Great Society burned through billions. By the late 1960s, the math no longer added up. France's Charles de Gaulle saw it first. Calling the system an exorbitant privilege, he began exchanging French dollars for gold. One by one, other nations followed. Fort Knox's vaults began to empty. In 1965, the U.S. held over 19,000 tons of gold. By 1971, less than half remained. The world was demanding real value. America was printing promises. Nixon faced an impossible choice: drain the gold supply to defend the dollar, or break the promise that held the global system together. On August 15, 1971, he chose the latter. In a televised address, Nixon ended the convertibility of dollars to gold. The temporary suspension became permanent. Overnight, the world's reserve currency was backed by nothing but faith. Economists called it the Nixon shock. But what it really was a pivot. Most believed it marked the end of U.S. financial dominance. In reality, it was the prelude to something even greater. Because in the shadows, American strategists were already designing a new anchor, one not made of gold, but of oil. The year was 1973. The world trembled as the price of oil quadrupled almost overnight. Gas lines snaked for miles. Economies buckled. And in that chaos, Washington found its opportunity. Behind closed doors, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger began negotiations with the only kingdom that mattered: Saudi Arabia, the largest oil exporter on earth. The goal was simple, but revolutionary: make every barrel of oil sold anywhere in the world payable only in U.S. dollars. In 1974, the deal was sealed. Riyadh agreed to price its oil exclusively in dollars and invest its surplus profits in U.S. Treasury bonds. In return, America promised protection military bases, advanced weapons, and the full shield of its geopolitical power. It was a transaction disguised as an alliance, and it rewired the global economy overnight. Soon, every OPEC nation followed. Japan, Germany, and the rest of the industrialized world had no choice. To buy oil, they first had to buy dollars. To earn those dollars, they had to sell goods to the United States or borrow from American banks. The loop was perfect. Demand for the dollar became eternal, artificial, and absolute. By 1975, the dollar was no longer just money, it was oil. Every tanker that left the Persian Gulf carried with it a hidden tax, the requirement to bow to American currency. The system financed endless U.S. deficits, foreign wars, and political leverage disguised as economic order. Washington could print power. But power built on dependence is a fragile kind? The same mechanism that bound the world to America also ensured that one day the world would seek to escape it. Because every empire that controls energy through money eventually forgets that both are finite. And when the wells of trust begin to run dry, even oil can't keep the machine alive. The seeds of rebellion had already been planted. Half a century later, the machine that once powered the American century is beginning to tear itself apart. The same nations that built their economies on petrodollars are now building exits, and they're not doing it quietly. China, now the world's largest oil importer, has signed long-term contracts to buy crude from Saudi Arabia and Russia in yuan. Russia, cut off from the SWIFT payment system after 2022, began demanding rubles for gas and oil exports. Iran has traded energy for gold for over a decade. India, too, has opened rupee-based trade accounts buying Russian oil without touching a single dollar. The pattern is unmistakable. Dollar reserves held by central banks have fallen from 71% in 1999 to 58% today, a seismic shift in the world of reserve currencies. Non-dollar oil transactions have tripled in just 5 years. The BRICS bloc is building its own payment architecture, designed specifically to bypass American financial control. This is the hidden mechanism few ever question. The dollar's strength depends not on productivity, but on compulsion. The world's demand for dollars wasn't natural, it was engineered through the global energy system. As long as oil required dollars, America could run deficits without consequence. But remove that demand, and the illusion collapses. For decades, U.S. policymakers wielded this power like a weapon, freezing assets, cutting off access, enforcing sanctions at will. But every time Washington pulled that financial trigger, it taught its rivals a deadly lesson: dependence is vulnerability. Now, those rivals have built their own armor currency swaps, gold-backed oil contracts, digital payment rails outside American reach. The invisible chains that once bound the world to the dollar are snapping, one by one. And as those links break, the empire's heartbeat, the artificial demand for its money, begins to slow. What comes next isn't a rumor. It's a reckoning. History has a cruel rhythm. Every currency that ruled the world eventually met the same fate. The Spanish silver real, the British pound sterling, all promised permanence. All fell when their empires overreached. The dollar is next in line. The signs are no longer subtle. Central banks are hoarding gold at levels unseen since the 1960s. China refuses to reveal the full size of its reserves. Russia built the world's 5th largest gold stockpile before sanctions struck. The message is clear: they no longer trust paper promises. They trust metal, land, and energy. Even America's closest allies are hedging their bets. The European Union designed new trade systems that bypass U.S. sanctions. Japan and South Korea expanded currency swaps outside the dollar. In the Middle East, once the cradle of the petrodollar, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are accepting yuan for oil. The very architects of the old system are quietly dismantling it. When this shift reaches critical mass, the consequences will be brutal: a collapse in foreign demand for U.S. debt, treasury markets in free fall, inflation igniting as imports skyrocket. Washington will face an impossible choice: raise rates and crash the economy, or print its way into hyperinflation. Either path leads to a reckoning no printing press can escape. For ordinary people, the fallout will be personal. Savings will shrink, prices will surge, the illusion of endless prosperity will shatter. The dollar bought 50 years of power without sacrifice, but every debt eventually comes due, and when this empire's bill arrives, it won't be paid in paper. It will be paid in standard of living, in lost trust, in the silence that follows the fall of a system built on belief. The petrodollar bought half a century of illusion. Its death will buy the next century of chaos.